Welcome, guys, to another episode of the One of Us podcast. We're so excited that you're here and listening. We got a good little episode for you guys today. We're going to be chatting about work-life balance, everything in between. And I'm just excited to hear everyone's opinions, how their journey has been with work-life balance, and I guess just our desires for the future, right? And especially what God has to say about it. And so we're excited. How are you guys feeling today?
You know, it's 9 a.m. here, so
Listen, guys, if you're watching this on video, we just want to apologize beforehand for any bags under our eyes that you may see. Okay, we're trying. We're getting the skincare routines. We're trying our best here. You can roast us in the comments. It's okay. We'll accept.
Look, the bags are the consequence of mismanaged work-life balance.
No,
oh, that's
we're
good, Juan. I like that.
we're learning right alongside you
Yeah,
guys.
we also make mistakes.
Yeah. So hope you guys just feel like you're in this conversation, that you're one of us, because that's the whole point. That's why we're here. That's why we gather to chat about these things.
Hey, Juan, why don't you start us off? I think you had some good topics.
Okay, so I think before we act, or I guess I just want to open up the discussion up to just defining the terms. Like, what do we think work-life balance is? Like, what is work? What are some examples of work, and what is life?
Yeah, this super foundational, I guess. I heard it from a friend like years ago, but he said work is worship. And like obviously as Christians, like anything that we do is to glorify God. Like do everything as if unto the Lord. So foundationally that's what work would be, whether it's your livelihood or whether it's you got a ton of acreage and you're working on a farm or whatever.
Or it could be
Mm-hmm.
school
um,
too.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes school, if you're a student,
yeah,
that could be your
exactly, it
work.
just depends on the season of life that you're in, but I think in all of our contexts it's we got to make money. We got to pay bills. So it's the stress is a little higher sometimes.
And then, what would you say about life? Like, what is the life? Because actually, Arturo, I want you to talk about your work-life balance a little bit because I think yours is a little more unique. Yours is because you work at a church, so maybe you can kind of describe how that work-life balance has been for you.
Yeah. Man, it's kind of interesting because I don't really like view it as work. I view it as ministry, and then I just God provides like God gives me a provision,
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
because then and maybe other people who are listening to this who work in full-time ministry, you can kind of get into the spot of, man, I'm not being compensated for my time, or I've this week I worked 80 hours because it was Easter Sunday or Christmas weekend and junior high summer camp or high school summer camp, and all these youth events that are happening, or what have you. And then other weeks you work maybe like just a regular job, or maybe sometimes even less. So I just view it as, hey, I'm serving Jesus and I meet the need, whatever the need may be during that season. And then God just gives me a provision. So that's kind of how I view it, very foundationally. Obviously, there's a lot of branches off of that.
Mm-hmm.
I guess I have a question for that, because given that your context is a little bit more unique, like it's not as like 9 to 5, Monday through Friday, like that's your job. Like, what does the balance, I guess, look like for you? Is there a balance that you found in that at all?
Yeah, I mean, our senior pastor, he's amazing. He's always like, hey, like if one time he saw me stay late at work, he's like, hey, go home. He's like, don't stay here. So that was kind of like really, like recentering, like, oh,
Yeah.
okay, like even our senior pastor is like, hey, you need to go do something else that's not ministry for a while, because
Mm-hmm.
that's not healthy. But so I try to, we have like a time that we leave, so I try to, if I usually not serving at a ministry post 4 p.m., I'll usually leave at 4 p.m. And that's usually a majority of the week. So
Mhm.
there's a pretty good balance there. I wouldn't
Hmm.
say it's at an unhealthy point.
Okay, and then Tati or Vic, do you guys want to talk about a little bit of your guys' experience? Because I feel like the rest of us, we have the more traditional work-life balance, the either 9 to 5 or whatever it looks like, and how do we kind of balance that with our life outside of work?
Yeah. I think for me, so I'm a teacher. I work at a preschool. Um, but I say for me, things can, going through the day, it's a very busy, uh, on your feet, running around. I love my students, but I have a couple runners. So I'm constantly on the move and on the go. But I think like work life balance for me, I think kind of goes into like, making, work is work, but I don't necessarily make it my entire life. And I think I balance it with life of like, life is in terms of, my walk with God, my time with friends, also taking care of myself, physically by, working out and, making time for family. And so that's kind of what life entails. And so, because I've fallen into the trap where I've kind of made work like my entire life and my identity, where it's like, nope, can't do that. I got to do some stuff for work, or nope, I didn't finish this. Like, I got to do it now. And I've missed out on a lot of things. And I think now I've kind of gotten into balance where I'm like, when I'm at work, I'm at work, I talk with the people I work with, very intentional and loving towards the kids. But when, you know, when it hits, 3:30, I'm done, and now my focus is more geared towards the things that are gonna help me emotionally, mentally, and spiritually. And so it was a hard balance to get there, and to one, just to prioritize, because my faith and walk with God is obviously my first and foremost. And I know that like in the past with work, sometimes God has taken a backside, and I never want to do that. And so even in the job that I am in now, sometimes after work, going to Bible studies or hanging with friends, or going to the gym, or seeing family, sometimes the time goes by quickly. But I always get up a little bit earlier in the mornings, and I'll drive to work and just sit in the parking lot and just put my phone on do not disturb and like read for at least like 30 minutes. And then on Saturdays, when I, at least for 1 hour of the day, try and sit down and have time with God. And then throughout the week, like even on Wednesday, I went over to Haunted Crystals and hung out. But that's kind of like what work life balance is for me. Work is work, it stays at work. And life is, I'm going to go do life, with my friends, with my family, and have that one on one time with God as well. So that's kind
Hmm.
of what it is for me.
Yeah. For me, I also work kind of a 7:30 to 4 p.m. job. And for me, something that has been really important in this season is I feel like oftentimes when people work kind of the schedule that I do, sometimes you get home after a long day, and I'm a social worker, so um, I'm constantly meeting with clients. I'm running around the town the whole day. Like, I'm kind of exhaust myself. And then, it can be tempting to get home and just veg and be done and just, oh, you're just so exhausted, you just need to rest. And that's important too. But something that has been important to me in this work life balance is, actually living my life post 4 p.m.
Mm-hmm.
as well. Like, not just being like calling it a day, like I'm done, I'm burnt out. Like, I push myself a little bit more. And I always surprise myself with what I'm able to do, who I'm able to see, what I'm able to accomplish,
Hmm.
even things that are restful for me, which may be like reading or doing something like that. I like compartmentalize my time, and I like separate it into chunks so that I actually have a life, and my life isn't work, um, sort of thing.
Yeah, I think it's very easy to. I think maybe early on, maybe you guys can kind of speak to this. Early on, it's very easy to not compartmentalize, and I think the easiest way that I learn is from my mistakes.
Mhm.
It's just ingrained into my memory by that point.
Yeah.
um, and so early on, it can be very easy not to compartmentalize, and because you realize that not maybe not having that balance, not compartmentalizing a little bit, can be unhealthy, you learn how to do it or later on
Mm-hmm.
in your career.
Yeah, I think that's so true because I even remember when I was in college and I worked, I didn't mind if like work called me at 9 p.m. for me to do something or whatever, you know what I mean? Because I was like I have the time. My life is super flexible right now. Like I'm good. So maybe that doesn't work for everyone, but I was able to push those boundaries a little bit more because I'm like, that's fine. Whereas now, like even I have to work on Sunday, this Sunday,
Hmm.
for an event at work, and it starts at 10 a.m. So I'm gonna go to the 8:30 a.m. service, and my boss was like, "Hey, can you pick up something before the thing?" And I was like, "Hey, I gotta go to church, girl. I usually go at the 10 a.m. I'm going to 8:30. Like I can do it Saturday or have someone else do it." But and having those, and maybe you don't have a relationship like that with your boss or your coworkers, but that's something that I do. I'm like, no, don't mess with my Sundays. Don't mess with my time, with my people.
You're like,
Um,
no, I can't. I'm a church girl and I go to
I'm a
church.
church girl. Go to church and read her Bible.
Mhm.
So, yeah, and I encourage people. I think sometimes people are afraid to like say that, right? To say no to like a boss or a coworker or something if there's like a need. But if you have something obviously that's important, that's planned, or that you're prioritizing, but it's okay. Like it's okay to be like, okay, let's find another time. Like, listen, this is important to me, this event or this time away. You know what I mean? I need to rest, I need a break, um,
Hmm.
things like that. So that's just something that I do specifically.
Todd, what about you?
Um, I will say normally work's not as busy as it has been the last couple weeks just because a lot of events, so work life balance has been a little
Wait,
harder the
for those of
last.
us who don't know, what do you do for work?
I'm basically like the head of marketing of a startup music company. It's
Amen.
it's a lot. Um
She's basically a very important person, guys.
We're all
do not.
peasants. I'm just kidding.
No, no. Um yeah, it's been, we went to Texas and worked pretty much from the moment that we woke up till we fell asleep, and coming back's been crunch time. But normally I do work like my normal hours. I do try to just, make time for the gym and socialization with like my church friends. Try reading my Bible, but it's been a little rough the last couple weeks.
Hmm.
It's
Mhm.
Yeah. Yesterday, I had to go to a show at like it started at 9. You work in music when you show up only for the act you're supposed to be there for. So I showed up at like 11:30. The
PM?
artist went up. Yep. The
That's
artist
crazy
didn't
talk.
go on till 12:30, and I didn't get home till 2 o'clock in the morning. So a little gist of my life the last couple weeks. Yeah, I normally, even though I've been super busy, like I still have been trying to prioritize like hanging out with people, fellowshipping, obviously going to church. I mean, I'm on my last week, but we were doing like a class to start serving. So, just make your priorities priority. And
Mhm.
something I will say that I struggle with that I was really excited about yesterday is asking for time off. My
Mhm.
parents kind of make it seem like it's bad. So it's like in my brain, I feel bad for asking time off. So
Mhm.
yesterday I had, messaged my boss and I said, hey, like there's a couple things coming up and I wanted to be transparent on like where I'm going. Well, I didn't say specific, but like I'm going to be out of town and these are the dates. And I'm like, let me know if it's okay. She's like, oh yeah, that's fine. Just talk to your coworker and make sure that the work gets done. And I was like, oh, like that was easy.
Yeah.
Um,
Hmm.
I think once you have that ingrained, like asking for time off is bad. Like it's hard to unlearn that. Like even in the email, I said, hey, I can still work if needed. Because like, I love my job and I take it very seriously. And
Hmm.
honestly, once I will say, like when you are more higher level, you have a lot more responsibility. And sometimes like it is a lot on you, like you're very essential to the company. So I know
Yeah.
for me, like I feel like, oh shoot, like I know I'm important, I know I'm needed, and I don't want to be the reason that things get behind. So it's
You
like
also
from
can't
now
get
on.
away with compartmentalizing as much.
Mhm.
Yeah,
Mhm.
yeah, for
Well,
sure.
I think that's like shows like we're all in this process together. We're all learning, how to balance our life and the different careers that we're in because we're all in kind of different areas. And I'm sure Juan will share in a little bit too, just kind of what he does. But yeah, so don't feel like you're alone in this. We're all learning. We're all trying to balance and learn what this means. But I think Tati, what you shared was really encouraging. Like, I just want people to know, like, we may feel or have this voice in our head of like, we can't, like, we need to hoard our sick days, hoard our time off, hoard this and that. Like, I can't ask, like, what if this, that, like, just, find some freedom and like, hey, if there's something you need to do, if there's somewhere you need to go, if you need a day, like, it's okay to ask. The worst they say is no, right? But to just kind of push yourself a little bit out there and just ask, right? Because rest is so important, and I'm sure we'll get to that, talking about that as well, and just like regrouping, right? And that self-care is important too. But Juan, why don't
Yeah, and
you
I
tell
will
us a little
say
bit?
with how hard I've been working, I deserve those days off.
Yeah, you do.
I literally, there's been so many days the last couple weeks that I literally wake up, start working, and I do not stop until like the time that I sleep. So
Yeah.
it's about the work
No,
life balance.
and you do, and you don't have to
Yeah.
justify it, right? Like, you
Yeah.
do, you do good work. Juan, why don't you share with us a little bit about your experience before we continue on?
Okay, so main thing. Well, I'm a nurse. So yeah. Honestly, guys, I wasn't prepared to talk about my work-life balance, but
He's still thinking about work.
no. Okay, honestly,
Get a text
for
from Juan and
me,
Crystal saying prepare
uh,
for this, and then Juan shows up unprepared.
He thought he was just gonna ask all the questions, so I had to switch it up
I
on
had
him.
everything.
Emmons.
I had the podcast outlined here.
Reverse
Okay.
Uno card.
Okay. Well, I'm a nurse. For me, work-life balance, it's a little difficult just because sometimes at work it requires a lot of your attention because you're dealing with people's livelihood.
Mm,
And unfortunately, like in the medical field, when you make a mistake, it can sometimes lead to consequences or even death that are irreversible. And it involves a lot of focus and time. And so, kind of to what Arturo was saying, the compartmentalizing aspect of it can be really difficult. And it's I guess it's just um based off what everyone is saying. I think we've been kind of hitting on a lot of these topics that I think we'll just start to unpack as we get through the podcast. But kind of like our identity, burnout, um, how do we handle burnout? How do we honor work? And I think ultimately, this podcast is just how is a Christian's relationship with work, and how is it supposed to be like managed?
mhm,
So I think I just want to open up the floor because I think a lot of people who struggle with work life balance, one of the major roots is their identity. Like, right? So I think Victoria kind of talked about it a little bit, is our identity, whether it's in work or anything else, and how does that lead into a wrong work life balance. I guess I just want to open up how centering your identity in Christ, how that helps with your work life balance.
Hmm.
Yeah, well, that's a good question. Anytime I think about, you meet someone new and they say, "Hey, tell me about yourself." You usually say like, yeah, like for Juan, you'd say, "Well, I'm a nurse," or Vic, you'd say, "Hey, I'm a teacher." Tati, you say like, "Hey, I'm like a really important person um, in the marketing world," um, and you usually respond by telling them what you do, and I think that's just a very easy
Mm-hmm.
trap to fall into. Um, Obviously, as a believer, like our identity is not in what we did, but what He did for us, and that's just so reassuring because it doesn't matter what you do. That's never going to meet meet the definition for defining you.
Yeah.
Um, so that's what I would say as if you're struggling with identifying yourself with your occupation. Um, I would say, especially if you're a believer, that's not the plan that Jesus has for your life,
Hmm.
Mhm.
and that's not the identity that's stamped on you. That's not the identity that's sealed on you. Um, I did want to touch on one thing with work life balance. because it can be very easy to compartmentalize with time. All right, I'm not going to work, but sometimes it's hard to compartmentalize mentally.
Mhm.
Maybe there was a conflict with one of your coworkers. Maybe there was a decision that someone made that affected you, and so that doesn't really compartmentalize very easily. With time, you kind of take that with you. Um, so then you really have to rely on your identity in Christ and not your identity in your occupation. So
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think when you identify in your occupation, like you tend to, your emotions are really, based off how your performance is on your
Mhm.
occupation. So I think you end
mm,
up working isn't wrong, and we'll talk about how we should view work in a Christian perspective, but I think when you identify so much of yourself in what you do, you tend to your stress tends to be kind of dependent on your how you do on your job or how people view your work, and that's so very interchangeable, that's so malleable, so it can cause a lot of stress.
Yeah. And I think like what you guys are saying, what like makes us unique and what distinguishes all of us is not what we do but who we are, right? And what Juan is saying, like the fault in really making what you do who you are, right? The basis of like everything about you is what Juan was saying, that when you fail or when there's a mistake in a work environment, you take that as a reflection of who you are. But that's just what you do. And going back to what Arturo was saying about how, one of the first things you say to people is what you do, right? That's like, ding, 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 this is my identity,
hmm
or at least that's what we do. Something that I've been trying to practice because I've noticed that, and I even make mistakes on this, like in it being one of the first things that I talk about, or a way to try to relate to other people. But something I've been trying to practice is not asking people what they do, because you're meeting someone for the first time, you don't know them, you're like, oh, what's your name? Oh, cool, like, where are you from? Maybe that is the second question, and the third question is like, what do you do? Like, that's it. Like like maybe it's the third question, most of the times it's the first or the second, but really just getting to know people for who they are, not just what they do.
Mm.
Because sometimes people too, the jobs that they have isn't really a reflection of like what they want to be doing or this and that. It's just a means to an end to get by.
that's good. Yeah, I think one thing that you do, Crystal, really well is I've noticed because I always ask, "What do you do for work?" Like I'm just very like monotone. Just yeah, tell me what you do for work, and then that can be a conversation starter. But I notice you say, "What do you like to do?"
Mm-hmm.
And oftentimes they'll say, "Well, I like to do X, Y, and Z," and all those X, Y, and Z things usually aren't work for
Yeah.
most people.
Yeah. No, yeah, I try to ask people like, what do you like to do? What are your hobbies? Things like that. And then people feel like, or what has been a highlight of your week? Things like that. And you'd be surprised, like, people want to share about those things because they're more passionate about that sometimes than what they're doing. And obviously, I'm not
hmm
perfect at it, but I just encourage people to kind of maybe, you know, try to connect with people that way, because I think it's important. But something that I do, which what Arturo was talking about and how to compartmentalize mentally, is even on Wednesday when Victoria came over, I told her, okay, I'm going to tell you about what happened at work today because a lot happened, but I'm going to limit it to 10 minutes. Okay. And I don't know if I did limit it to 10 minutes, but I was like, I need to speak about what's been going on, but I'm not going to make it our whole evening together. And I'm going to, create a boundary for that. But maybe something like that will be helpful for people. Like, you can still share. You don't have to bottle up everything that's going on at work, or like something that occurred. You can share that and process that, but just being like, okay, that's it. That's all the time I'm giving that for tonight. The rest of the night, we're gonna go eat ice cream. We're gonna go walk around. We're gonna go do our thing. So I don't know. Maybe that's a good practice for some people too.
Yeah, I mean, I guess when I think about, I guess, identity manage, I guess work priority management, I think about Romans 12:2, where it says, "Do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewal
Mm-hmm.
of your mind, that by testing you may discern what is the will of God." what is good and acceptable and perfect. I think a lot of times, I guess maybe with the exception of Arturo, but we'll talk about that a little bit later. When you're working in the secular industry, a lot
Mm-hmm.
of times you're wanting to get the positive reaction from the world. You're trying to get that success driven aspect, and there's a lot of trials in that when it comes to your faith, and it's just really surrendering that aspect of your life to the Lord to really obey what He wants for you and your will. And yeah, I think if just trusting God in His lordship over your work, I think will lead to a better work life balance in terms of less stress and just living more at peace with what you do and what you're doing.
Yeah, I think that's so good because, we've talked about how work is not your identity. It's not who you are, but it is for most of the population what we do with a lot of our time. And so I think kind of going off of that one of like, trusting God in that, in your season, in the job that you're in at this current moment. Um, I think something that is really important as believers is even if we don't work in a space that's as cookie cutter as Arturo's, right? He works in ministry, he works for the church, like that is obviously a ministry, like, but I think for all of us, the work that we do just as believers is our ministry. We're spending at least 8 hours of our day with these people around
Mm-hmm.
this
Yeah.
environment. Like, you are a light in that space for a reason. Like, you were
Amen.
Hmm.
placed with those coworkers for a reason. And I try to do that whenever I start a new job. I'm like, okay, like I wonder what the reason is that I'm here. And sometimes I realize I'm like, okay, I'm here to talk to this one person. Like I'm here for this coworker. Like I'm here to like encourage her. I'm here to like share my faith in whatever facet that may be. That just may be by being who you are, right? Or sharing, depending on your context, right? And what you're capable of doing. But a Bible verse that I really like that I think speaks to this is Colossians 3:23-24. And whatever you do, work heartily as for the Lord and not for men, knowing that from the Lord you will receive the inheritance as your reward. You are serving the Lord Christ. So
Amen.
regardless of what you're doing, of what your context, whether it's like Tati VIP up here, like running the show, or if it's you're doing something small, you're doing Uber, you're a male person, like whatever it is, like whatever your context is, or you're doing social media or whatever, like whether it's traditional or non-traditional, like you're working as unto the Lord, right?
Amen.
So I just think doing everything you can to work with excellence, I think can be a distinguishing factor for believers, like just being positive and working with excellence and being an example in the way that you work. Like when you're in your work setting, I think part of work-life balance, when you're at work, do work excellently, right? And when you're apart from that, like, live your life and, do the other things that God has called you to do. But yeah, I just think it's important to have that mindset, because some people can go into work and maybe you don't like your work, and God understands that and God sees that, and maybe you don't find fulfillment in that. But just know that God has you there for a reason and for a season. It may not be forever.
Chris, what you said something about you said something really good. I wanted to elaborate on that, but I forgot what you said. Oh, working heartedly onto the Lord. I kind of want to touch base on that a little bit because that's something that's really helped me. That scripture has really helped me, and I always relate it to like soccer when I would play soccer in high school,
Mm-hmm.
and I would always um, try extra hard in the drills when I knew my coach was watching because I was doing it for my coach. But when my coach wasn't watching, I would just kind of do whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And how much more should I be trying when I know I'm doing it for God? Because I try really hard when I do it for man, but how much more should I be doing it when it's on to Jesus? Um, and so yeah, and that goes with any work. Um, so I really like that scripture. Thanks for sharing.
Yeah,
No,
of
yeah,
course.
and I think Crystal's really hitting at like, you know, how we view our relationship with work, that it doesn't have to be viewed negatively. Like obviously we've been spending majority of our time talking about work that you know, that some of us maybe are doing that we don't find a lot of passion or we're kind of stuck at doing because we it's a means to an end. We have to provide for our families or for ourselves. But I think to those people, I think a proverb that really speaks to me is Proverbs 14:23, where it says, "All hard work brings a profit, but mere talk leads only to poverty." And not that avoiding poverty isn't like our goal, but what the proverb really speaks to is that if you work hard onto the Lord in whatever you're doing, it'll always turn into a profit. Like whether it's a learning experience, or you help someone in their walk with Jesus, or maybe a door opens up to you, or maybe a door shuts in your life. But I think all that's really amazing. And but I actually want to turn the conversation a little bit to Arturo's situation, because I think there are some people who find their work fulfilling, and maybe sometimes they'll be working in ministry. But a conversation that I find myself having with a lot of people who do ministry is they often feel a sense of burnout. And not that people who are in the secular realm of work, like they don't feel burnout, they feel burnout as well. But I hear a lot of my Christian friends who are volunteering or they work for the church experience high levels of burnout. And I just want to hear, how
Mhm.
why does burnout happen, and how do we practically go about burnout?
Yeah, that's a loaded question. The first thing that I can think of is I think people might experience burnout in ministry in general because maybe you have higher standards of how you're going to be treated, or um, wh- expectations of how you're going to feel. I will say working in ministry is like a dream job. Um, it's just amazing. It's a huge blessing. But there's also times where ministry can be hard. And for some of you who serve in church, like maybe you're a super volunteer, you know, like you're just serving all the time in church. Like,
You're picking up 10 chairs
yeah,
every
picking
time.
up 10 chairs um, every Wednesday before youth group or something. I don't know. But something our senior pastor says is to be in ministry, you have to be wise as serpents, gentle as doves, and you have to have the skin of a rhino. And the skin of a rhino always kind of hit me different because there are a lot of things in ministry that are going to be hard. Um, you know, I'm involved in worship a lot when it comes to ministry, and um, we call it worship wars
Mm.
because you'll get people saying like the music's too loud or the music's not loud enough. There's not enough lights. There's too many lights. I want to worship with the lights off. I want to worship with the lights on. I like hymns. I don't like hymns. I like contemporary music. I don't like contemporary music. So it really is a battle. And so you really do have to, as a ministry leader, try to shepherd the flock of God and try to meet their needs because we're serving them, right?
Mhm.
If there was no people, there wouldn't be any ministry. And so people are the whole reason for the ministry. And, foundationally, it's serving Jesus. Um, so I think burnout, to answer your question, Juan, burnout, yeah, it is very likely for a lot of people. But, you know, sometimes you see really gifted people, like God has gifted this person, but because they've not stuck it out, because it was just a little bit of burnout that steered them off. But because of burnout, you kind of you kind of squander the giftings of God. And it's like the parable of the talents. You bury your talents, and when the master comes back and he's like, where did you invest it in?
Mhm.
Um, you know, so burnout can be very likely, but you kind of just really have to pray through it and um, just ask Jesus, to be your refilling, to be
Yeah.
Hmm.
constantly refilling your cup because you are pouring out a lot and you are serving a lot. Did that kind of answer your question?
Yeah, that was the first part of the question. I guess the second parter to my APA formatted question was with burnout. I think that was a great explanation for burnout. But I think just how do we as Christians combat burnout? And I guess either Tati or Vic, if you guys want to start us off, and what really helps you guys with burnout, or what's a good healthy rhythm that kind of helps us get out of that sensation.
Yeah, I think it's a balance. It's kind of like the whole topic. I'll try to like do fun stuff or do things that I consider like stress relief or just like relaxing. That way my brain can take a little bit of a break. So like I remember last week I went to go hang out with some friends at church and we just like had a chill movie night. Yeah, just doing like more chill things where I don't have to use my brain that much. I feel like that helps me really relax. And I don't know, I don't know what it is, but I love having deep spiritual conversations. And I've been
Mhm.
having a lot of those recently, and I feel like that just
Mm.
like helps relax me a little bit and helps me like feel a little bit refreshed.
Hmm.
For some reason, when you said deep spiritual conversations, I was thinking like theology debate and like Tati screaming to like another person about something. And I was like, wow, Tati, that sounds really relaxing.
No, not like yelling, just more like, oh, like this is what the
Encouraging,
Bible says
sharpening.
about X.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hmm.
So
Love
for
that.
me, that's, but yeah, using
Mhm.
less brain cell. The running joke right now at work is my coworker and I that led this event have a singular or half of a brain cell that we're still sharing because it's just a lot going on. But
Mhm.
yeah.
Okay, and then what about you, Vic? What really helps you in burnout?
I think for burnout, because I've definitely, have had my moments. But I think like as I grow and as I get older, as I work more, as I dive more into my relationship with Christ, and I found a couple verses to kind of back it up. So I'm just gonna share those and then go from there. So this one is Luke 5:15. It says, "But now even more the report about him went abroad, and great crowds gathered to hear him and to be healed of their infirmities. But he would withdraw to desolate places and pray."
Hmm.
Or there's Matthew 11:28. "Come to me, all who labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and lowly in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden
Amen.
is
Mhm.
light." And then 1 Corinthians 6:19. "Or do you not know that your body is a temple of the Holy Spirit within you, whom you have from God? You are not your own." And um I was doing my own research last night and trying to find Bible verses just to kind of share all these things. And I think the thing that kind of keeps me going and keeps me, you know, from facing that burnout is really just kind of, looking to God for that strength. Because I feel like when I tend to just do things for myself, I'm kind of just like, okay, whatever. Like, um, you know, I don't have much of a drive to do things, but like when I do things like where it says, your body is not your own, like I want to take care of my temple, or being able to, mentally and maybe spiritually exhausted, as Jesus did, he stepped back and he went away and he prayed and he took that time for him and his Father. And it's like those are things that like I try and do, and I'm not perfect at by any means. I have my moments where I'm like, you know what, I'm just gonna take a fat nap right now. And anyone that knows me knows that I love my naps. um but I've also tried to get out of the habit of not wasting that time and wanting to kind of be more present in this day to day, and again really kind of just you know leaning on God for all that strength. And I feel like the times that, I pray more, that I'm more in depth with him, or, when I live a life that is not for myself, but for others, it, it kind of discourages that burnout in a lot of areas. And so whether, like I said earlier, going to the gym or, going to a friend's house, I went over to Juan and Crystal's, and Crystal and I talked for like an hour, and then Juan came home and he's like, "Let's go get ice cream." And we went, got ice cream and walked around, and it was awesome. Or taking the time to call, like I called, Arturo called me the other day, and I called Tati yesterday, and little things like that where that's where that work life balance come in. It's my life isn't circled around work. I find rest in God. I
Mm-hmm.
find, joy in being with community, and I find, peace within Him.
Yeah.
So that's kind of how I combat,
That's good.
the burnout.
That's good. Yeah. I was going to say with burnout, I think it's a combination of preventative care and also like dealing with the burnout once it comes. Um, for me, something that's really good with preventative care is we've touched on it a little bit, but just like, creating those boundaries with work, trying not to be mentally turmoiled in my life after like a certain time, right? And not giving it like my mental or physical energy as much. But also, I think finding those things that really recharge you and offer you that rest that Victoria was talking about.
Naps, 100% naps.
For Victoria, they might be naps, but it doesn't have to be literal rest, right? It doesn't have to be like literal naps or anything like that. And it can be doing something, like taking your mind off of it, like what Tati was saying, but it can be other things too, like whether it's drawing or reading or whatever, or running, maybe for Arturo or whatever it is, just things that, help you just kind of de-stress a little bit and just start the second half of your day, I think is super important. Because like for me, I can take a walk and I'm healed. Like I'm good. Like I just need to walk around the block and I'm good. I'm good to like keep the grind going. So whatever that is for you guys, and I'm sure maybe we'll do an episode on this, but rest is even in like the 10 commandments, right? Like God practiced this, Jesus practiced this. Like it's so important. Like we weren't meant to stay on the grind. Like that isn't meant for us. And I know our culture is very much like, if you're not on the grind, if I say, what are you up to? And you don't say I'm busy, then you're lazy. That's not true. Like it's not cool to be busy. But I think our culture kind of makes that seem so. But yeah, I just think, the Bible talks at lengths and warns us against both things: idleness, laziness, and also overwork. So, really, our whole life is determined by how we balance those things, because we are meant to work, right? From the very beginning in Genesis, like they're working and doing things, right? And cultivating the land, whatever that is. So, we're called to it, but we're also kind of called to like find that balance in rest as well. And so I just encourage people, like, we're to do everything to glorify God. So in your resting and in your working, like, glorify God in that, whatever that looks like, whatever your context is for that.
I will admit something I know that I struggle with is like when I'm going through a really hard season, I tend to overbook myself because I want to stay distracted from those things and not have time to really think about it, and just kind of like, well, I'm too busy to even think or reflect on this. So, if you also struggle with that, like, no, you're not alone, and like reach out for help and still learn how to like process your emotions or like the things that you're going through with like a fellow brother or sister in Christ. I think it's very important.
Yeah. No, that is important.
And everything that everyone's saying is just amazing. Like, I really like that Victoria read Matthew 11:28-30. I actually wrote that down as well.
Is that
Because I
the
think,
yoke is easy?
where
Burden
Jesus,
is light,
saying that, you know, like all who labor and are heavy laden, to seek Him, for He will give us rest for our souls. And I think that's just a practice that a lot of us Christians and, here in our culture in America don't really practice that much. We don't really find our rest in Him. Like Arturo kind of mentioned it earlier, we sometimes in ministry or in our day to day work, we're pouring ourselves out constantly. I mean, we spend a third of our lives sleeping and a third of our lives working. And then I would say the other third of our lives, sometimes, I mean, we're all guilty of it, spending, mindless times, either watching shorts or just finding a way to just keep ourselves busy. I actually read this, I think it's a Pew study, but I read this statistic like last week, where the average Christian or the average person in America who identifies as Christian spends around 3 hours in their 3 hours reading their Bible throughout the week. Like for people who identify as Christian that go to church. So like if you work a traditional 40-hour work week, that's less than 10% of the amount you work, you spend your time with God. You know what I mean? And it's even less
Mhm.
for people who don't attend church. Like, I think people who identify as Christian who don't attend church, like the amount of time they spend reading their Bible a week is less than 60 minutes. So
Mm,
it's just astonishing that sometimes we try to find a cure for our burnout in so many different things that don't involve uh, Jesus, where he provides us rest. And I think
Mhm.
amen.
something that's helped me and something that Crystal and I always talk about is sometimes implementing a Sabbath, like trying to disconnect from just everything that's happening in life. You know, sometimes with family or work, it can be very stress inducing, and just finding time to really disconnect for a day or moments in a day to just worship the Lord and seek refuge there really rejuvenates you. You know what I mean? I think I'll also say to like Tati's point, like you find a lot of rest in fellowship as well, because sometimes in work, you have so many people defining who you are, and it's encouraging having brothers and sisters in Christ who constantly lift you up and remind you who Jesus says you are. And um, yeah, I think, it's definitely a priority management aspect when it comes to our relationship with work. I think Arturo said this a long time ago, and it just stuck to me is that, you'll always never have time for anything. Like, if you ever want to have time for something, you just have to intentionally make time for it. So sometimes I think we feel
Mhm.
like we we intentionally don't have time because we're inadvertently working so much, or we're sleeping, or we're doing this and that, but in reality we're being intentional in creating those times. So I think for our work life balance sake, we need to be intentional in creating those healthy rhythms to
Mhm.
require rest, and true rest, not just, you know napping's good, reading the word, worship, even going for a walk and just appreciating God's creation, can be very restful.
Mhm.
But
Hmm.
just be weary of, maybe doing things that aren't so restful, like, maybe watching a bunch of TikTok or YouTube isn't really the best source of rest. If it,
Rest. Yeah.
yeah, if you're just kind of keeping your brain on, or, gossiping, stuff like that isn't really restful.
Yeah. I love that one. You know, kind of on the train of statistics, I read this in a book that we're reading here on staff, and it says we tend to think of our lives are too busy, but they're not. We have time. Most Americans watch 15 to 20 hours of TV a week and spend up to 12 hours social networking. By age 18, an average person watches 20,000 hours of TV. So most of us, by the time we finish high school, will have spent over 2 years in front of the TV. On the other hand, by 18, most Christians have received fewer than 1,000 hours of biblical instruction. That is only about 42 days of spiritual learning compared to over 2 years of worldly indoctrination. On top
Mhm.
of this, we do not
Sheesh.
know many don't read regularly. So, yeah, um, I think the two comparisons there are 42 days as opposed to, you know,
Yeah.
close to 700 days, 2 years.
Hmm. I was just gonna say, like, I think it's like you can even really self-diagnose yourself. I mean, just look at your screen time and ask yourself, like, wow, this is how much time I'm spending on my free time on all these things, and just reflect and say, like, how much time am I spending, in fellowship or reading the word, or like trying to grow spiritually.
Yeah, and it is like what you're saying, a prioritization. Um, we were all part of this uh, campus ministry called InterVarsity, and we did an outbreak. We're doing like leadership breakout groups, and this was a time in my life where I was double booking all the time. And one of the breakout groups was time management, and the gentleman who was leading it, his name's Ken. Shout out to Ken. But he said, okay, time management. He's like, as Christians, he wrote a list on the whiteboard, and he says, as Christians, um, number one is Jesus. All right, number two, moving on. And that just always stuck with me because there was no if, ands, or buts. There was no debate whether Jesus was prioritized number one in the life of a believer. That was a non-negotiable. Um, and oftentimes I look and I reflect at my day, and I say, man, I just haven't been in my Bible because I've been so busy. Well, why does God get my leftovers?
Mm-hmm.
Why does Scripture, like, why can't I say to my day, sorry, I've been too busy with God? Why do I have to say to my God, sorry, my day's been too busy? And I
Mm-hmm.
give
Mm-hmm.
God my leftovers. So it really is one, you're saying, a priority. If you want to make it happen, you will.
Mm-hmm.
That's good.
Um, I would just say, for anyone who's feeling a little bit burnt out or they have questions about, what's their relationship with work going to look like, whether you're in school or not. But
Mm-hmm.
I think the best thing you can do if you're in a season of uncertainty is to just pray to God, pray that He would, reveal those things to you about yourself, that you'd be more self aware and that you would prioritize some of that rest with Jesus. And,
Hmm.
I think all those things will lead to a better work life balance where you'll be, you know, really, you'd feel really at peace and you'd feel really rested for your day to day. And I guess for anyone out there who is in a bubble where, they're doing something they don't like, just I pray for that, the Lord would give you patience and peace for the season that you're in.
Amen.
Yeah. I was going to say, just quickly, this might be backtracking, but I just had a thought of maybe there are students out there. I know we talked a lot about work, but um,
Mm.
being a student is also work, right? And I think being a student, it might be even easier to put your identity in like your academics, your achievements, the degrees, the stature, and things like that. So I guess I just wanted to speak to the students of, hey, I've been there. I've been the person that made my school my life. I've been the person that thought, my grades what were defined me, or how high I achieved was what defined me, or how hard I worked, the sleepless nights were what defined me, and it doesn't. And I didn't find true peace and true relationship with God when I like put that to the side and realized that's not who I am and that's not what makes me important. um so that's just a thought that I had for the students of just like, again, do your work with excellence, but if you get a B, it's not it's not a reflection on your character or who you are. And I know that may sound silly, but that's really a spot that I was in
Mm-hmm.
many years back. But you fail a test, that doesn't define you. You know what I mean? Like, you don't get in a certain program or get in another, like that's not a reflection on who you are. And you have so much life to live, and the Lord has a plan for your life and He will direct your steps. So just, I guess, place that also at the Lord's feet would be my encouragement.
Hmm.
And
I would say
another,
the
yeah.
exact same thing for athletes.
Yeah, that's good for athletes too. Yeah, it's so easy to like find these things, and especially when you receive praise for something. I know when I wasn't an athlete by any sense of the word, but when I participated in sports in my life too, when you receive so much praise for something, whether it's academics or athletics or work or whatever it is, you can really take that on. Because I remember, you know, when your parents or other people speak highly of you in a certain way, you're like, you want to keep up the image, right? Um, because you're like, oh dang, like this is something that people love to talk about or really encourage me in, or see me in this light on. Um, but again, like, do excellently in whatever you're doing, but just know that, you get an injury in your sport. Yeah, that sucks because you had a vision for your life, but God has a plan for you, and it's so much better than what you can imagine. Um, and you just gotta trust Him in that and who you are. Being an athlete is what you're doing, or being a student is what you're doing, or being a worker is what you're doing, but it's not who you are. And then I wanted to say too, just like, I've been bumping into videos recently and talking to people. I have a lot of exposure to senior citizens and older adults. And whenever I talk to them, one of the first things they say when I ask them, like, oh, like about their life or what they think, what they would do differently, or, because there's so much wisdom there because they've lived 60, 70, 80 years of life. One of the first things that people say is, I wish I wouldn't have, you know, committed every ounce of energy I had into this position or this work and stuff. Like, I wish I would have valued and seen the value of the now and the present and the time with family, friends, what I'm doing, whatever purpose and passion and calling God has given you as well. So I just encourage people, yes, work heartily unto the Lord. Like, it's a good thing. Maybe try to find work that you find purpose or calling in, or you feel God really ushering you into.
Yep.
But also take a pause and know that you don't have to live so much in the future of just like the goals that you're trying to reach. Those are great, right? Ambitions are amazing and are from the Lord. And, he wants the desires of our hearts, if there are for him and to glorify him. But I just encourage people to be present, be available, and see the fruits and the blessings that you have now. Because we can so often just be wanting more and more, get higher level, get higher pay, get, to the next year in school, get to the next level of, rigor in athletics, whatever it is. But I just encourage people, value the now. I guess that would be my closing statement.
So I wanted to add one more thing. The importance of like obviously working hard, but also knowing like we're not perfect. So like, at work, you're going to make mistakes. And it's kind of like how you go and bounce back from those mistakes.
Mm-hmm.
It's not about how hard you can get hit, but about how. I'm just kidding.
Finish it.
Wait, finish
I actually
it.
forgot
I
it.
wanna hear.
Arturo watches
Phone a friend.
Arturo watches those in motivational videos on YouTube.
Amen.
What is it? It's not about how hard you
You
can
can get hit, but about how
How
fast
hard
you can.
No, it's not how hard you
Oops.
can hit. It's how hard you can get hit and keep moving forward.
Thanks,
There you
Juan.
go. Thank you, Juan.
Full
That's a
circle
real
moment.
man right there.
Okay, well, looks like we're nearing the end of this podcast episode. Just if you have any comments about your work-life balance, what's helped you, just drop them down in the comments or just send us a message. See what could really help our brothers and sisters out. But as we end, we always do a hot take or a spicy story. So today we're gonna do a spicy story by Miss Victoria Mang, and it has to do with
Yeah.
work-life balance and how she prioritized her fellowship
One
above
or the
her
other.
work.
One over the other.
This isn't a recommendation on how you should do this.
I'm
but
not gonna say don't ever do this. This was a bad decision on my part, but let me just set the scene. So this was when I was in college. I was working at Jimmy John's. Shout out to Jimmy John's. I actually love their sandwiches. Best sandwiches ever. That's a hot take. But anyway, the reason I really worked there was because I just needed money to go to Costa Rica.
The priorities
And
were right.
I worked there for a couple weeks, and I had enough where I was like, okay, I kind of don't really need this job anymore, because I had started working another job and that one paid way more. But truth be told, I didn't know how to quit. So anytime I had a shift that, I was given a shift, I would put it up on the board because I always knew someone was going to take it. So in my head, I was like, I'm just going to keep putting my shifts up, and I'm just going to slowly
phase out.
disappear. I'm going to phase out.
What is this quiet quitting?
And it was quiet quitting because I didn't know how to call and be like, hey, I don't want to work here. And truth be told, it was just that simple. Hey, I don't want to work here anymore. But I remember Crystal and I were walking from our apartment, and we were walking to class, and I got a call because I had also never saved my boss's number. So I forgot that. So I didn't realize it was him calling me. And he calls, and his name was Tim. Great guy. He was a great boss to work for. But he's like, hey, Victoria. And I was like, hey, what's up, Tim? And he goes, what you doing? And I was like, just walking to class, gotta get that degree. And he goes, I see you keep putting your shifts up on the board. And I just go, yeah. And he goes, so do you want to work here? And I said, no, not really. And he goes, all right, have a good day. And I was like, you too, Tim. I'll see you around.
Oh my gosh.
And then that was it.
Wait, Vic, weren't you scheduled for that day? And he's like, where are you at? And you're like, oh, I quit.
No, because I kept putting my shifts up, so I just knew someone would take it.
So she probably
so-
was scheduled, but she just put it up.
Maybe, but I put it up.
Did you ever use Tim as a reference in Jimmy John's?
Absolutely not. No, there were so many times. There was even one time, apparently, I had a huge, a rip in my pants. And Tim comes to me and he goes, "Hey, you got a big hole in the back of your pants." And I was like, "Oh, well, that's rough." And he goes, "Do you want to go home and change?" And I was like, "Yeah." And he goes, "Well, hey, we're overstaffed. If you want to come back, you can, but you don't have to." And I said, "Okay, I'm probably just gonna go home." So
That's crazy.
And
he slowly started to see.
a quick side note on this: I also applied for this job, but I got rejected.
It's because you didn't
Vic-
make that sandwich freaky fast.
Vic and I went into the interview at the same time. They just did one of us before the other. Vic got the job, and I did not. And see, another example that didn't define me. It's okay. We moved on to bigger
First of all,
and better
that-
places.
Because you probably would have done a lot better job. No, I'm kidding.
Honestly, truth be told, Crystal probably would have. Crystal probably would have stayed there and actually worked her shifts.
I just remember I didn't know Victoria worked at Jimmy John's, so I went into Jimmy John's with a friend to get a sandwich, and there's just for some reason
Your sandwich wasn't
Don't
freaky
make-
fast.
I just didn't notice that Victoria was the one taking my order until she
How?
finally said "Hey, Arturo."
It was
I'm
that
sure,
glossy
what the-
forehead.
That's like
we
the
didn't-
only memory I have of Victoria working at Jimmy John's.
Yeah.
He's like,
People
there's
come in a-
no way.
Well, I literally worked there for like 2 weeks. So,
It took you 2
I
weeks to get Costa Rica money?
well, I needed like extra spending money because I already paid, and I was like, I just need a little bit more. That way, I can kind of just like live my life in Costa Rica. And it was during the summertime, so I wasn't doing anything. So I was just working, and I worked and had enough, and I was like, all right, I really don't need this anymore.
Well, there you have it, ladies and gentlemen. Work-life balance.
The work-life balance at its
From
finest.
none other
Just
than
kidding.
Victoria May.
Spicy
But,
story.
guys-
Spicy story.
Spicy stories. We're so glad you guys joined us for this video. Please just leave a comment on if there's any other episodes you'd like to see from us. We want to make this a community, so encourage each other in the comments. Encourage each other by subscribing and following us on Instagram and TikTok and all the other things. But we hope you guys have a wonderful rest of the day, whatever time that you're listening this to, and we guys will see you next week. Love ya.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.